Hello, Austin. I'd like to thank you for allowing me into your homes for this 39th edition of Esoteric Science Roundtable. Today I would like to consider the topic, the heart. To begin, it would serve us to start with some of what is currently known to science and medicine about the dense physical organ and its exoteric or outer qualities and functions. Now we know from science that the heart is the main organ in what is considered the circulatory or vascular system. Obviously, that is the system that allows the life fluids, the blood in particular, to be pumped through the entire body and to nourish the body as a result of that flow. And so we do find, again, the life fluids, the blood in particular, that is pumped through, and the heart as the pumping mechanism, the organ that allows this blood to flow through all of the individual organs of the body and then find its way back into return. And this whole process, this exchange and interplay of energy and force that takes place within our body. And we can draw many analogies between the way the circulatory system and the heart works in the human body and the larger picture, and again to draw some comparisons and analogies, which I'll get into a bit later. Also, secretions of the glands find their way into the bloodstream, and so the different secretions from the glandular activity of the endocrine system also find their way through the bloodstream into various parts of the body, and so the varying amounts of glandular activity and secretions in the body and the bloodstream at any given time ultimately make us what we are, because we are regulated by the glandular activity and vice versa, and so we find our way through these glandular secretions, and that helps make us what we are, essentially. Size and many things like that that are regulated by the virtue of these the glandular secretions. Also, the ability to maintain a healthy cell structure also is tied in with the blood and the whole blood system, and also the water that is carried within the bloodstream as well. As we know, we are mostly water, and that part of the method for that to get from point A to point B, obviously, is through the circulatory system. Also, from the aspect of life and death, both life and death are known to be tied to the blood. That again is a bit more of an esoteric or inner aspect or quality of the blood. But in the future, science will one day discover the heart as a generator of a specific, active, and sentient current, which produces the positive aspect within the healthy cell. And so, aside from being the pump that circulates and generates, not generates specifically, but pumps the blood through the circulatory system, it also is the dispenser of, again, a certain type of active or intelligent current or fluid, which also makes its way through the body and, again, produces a positive aspect which gives vitality and life to each individual cell. Now, upon nearing death, a certain process takes place, a certain chemical process takes place in which the life force or essence is chemically changed and becomes more negative, and then the cell gradually or rapidly begin to lose their elasticity and ultimately decay and die results from this procedure. And so we see how with the adding to the blood of this particular essence and the withdrawing, or the changing rather, more so would be more appropriate, of this particular fluid, this affects our vitality or our lack of vitality, and ultimately the withdrawing of the consciousness from the physical vehicle. And that's all part and parcel of the work of the heart, and again, what science will embrace more so in the future as it becomes more understanding of the true nature of the functions of the heart. Now also, the heart does not create blood, and that's something that most people are generally aware of. It only circulates and directs the bloodstream, the flow of blood. And so again, it's merely a director of this stream. There is no origin of the blood within the heart. It simply just moves it through the system and directs it through the different organs and through the various parts of the body, as I spoke of earlier. And so if we want to consider from the part of analogy, if we take the old axiom, as above, so below, we will find much in the way of analogy and comparison between several systems. And I'd like to compare in particular The way that the heart works within the organs, or in conjunction with the organs within the physical body, and how that ties into the way the sun works and how it is involved with the exchange of energy between the various planets in a solar system. Excuse me. And so, again, much analogy can be attained by an assessment of ourselves, by understanding how the body, the physical body works, and the mechanisms of the physical body do the work that they do to keep this physical vehicle animated. And if we understand ourselves and our place within the larger environment, again, we can make comparisons between what is known as the microcosm and the macrocosm. The microcosm being our human life, and the macrocosm being the larger picture, the larger reality that, again, we mirror in our creation. And so in this instance, we find the heart as the alpha and the omega, as the origin and the ending, as far as sensitivity, as far as awareness as well. But to get back to the analogy between the heart and the sun, we understand how the heart pumps the blood through the different organs in the circulatory system, and also the way the sun moves and directs energy between the different various planets. Now, just in the same sense that the heart does not generate or create blood, the sun itself does not create or generate heat or energy. It is merely a reflector, and that's something that science has yet to really grasp as well. The surface that we see of the sun when we look out into space or look up in the sky, again, is merely a reflection of different exchanges and interplays of energy between the various planets and other cosmic bodies. And that exchange and interplay within our system is demonstrated with the sun, again, reflecting this energy. And much so the same with the heart, how the heart just takes the blood and pushes it through to the various organs. If we think about the various planets and this exchange that takes place, it's very similar. The sun, again, is merely a reflector. It's not an originator of any quality of heat, but it merely reflects from the other various bodies, and this exchange takes place. And so if we can draw that analogy, that's helpful to get a basis for some of the remainder of this discussion. And just in the same sense that the heart is throbbing to push and pulse the blood through, also the sun radiates, and it radiates the light that eventually makes its way to our planet and the other planets, and then again is exchanged through the system and then finds its way circulating back. And we see this within a closed system, we see circulation, but then outside of the system, there is exchange at larger levels. Just as the system within our closed physical vehicle can exchange and move itself out and exchange with the other systems as well. And there is that magnetic interplay that I'll go into a bit more as far as this discussion. And so the initial aspirations that one develops would lead one from the inner physical self and up until a larger, more inclusive understanding, leading to an infinite love and expression. And that's part of that as well, as far as this exchange that takes place. Again, the exchange between a human heart and other human hearts, and other living things, and the exchange that takes place on the systemic level between our solar system and other solar systems and constellations, and how that rapport, that magnetic exchange, sometimes known as the science of astrology, affects us and is part and parcel of our delvings with one another here on the physical plane, this exchange that takes place at many levels. And so as far as, again, the heart merely as a director of the flow of blood, it's not an originator of the blood, in the same sense that the sun is merely a radiating agent, and it merely reflects the energy that it receives on through the system and facilitates that exchange. And so throughout the entire cosmos, we do find this magnetic exchange and interplay. Even at the level of the atom, we find there is consciousness, and there is this level of vitality that animates the small fragment of the atom and even the subatomic particles on up into points that our finite thinking can't even comprehend. And so that magnetism does exchange from that small level all the way through the far vaster than we can even comprehend, as far as, again, this level of magnetic exchange and interplay that takes place. And so ultimately, that being the case, the heart is the one way for us to find that more inclusive approach, the way to tap in on that current of magnetism and to bring into our own understanding and level of awareness and level of consciousness the more all-inclusive, the more full, comprehensive picture, and a greater understanding of, again, our relation to the whole. And that's very important to understanding how our individual heart relates. Now, certainly, we have to keep in mind that there is what science acknowledges as the dense heart, and then there is, outside of that, the ideas that are connoted through all of the literature of the great loves, epics, all of the time that man has spent in some way or another cataloging and trying to capture in some way the concept of love, whether it's through painting, again, writing, some artistic expression, creation of music. We find man trying to capture, again, the quality of love in some way and to bring it into our physical expression. And obviously we can understand the limitation of that and how that has its finite aspects, and it can only do so much to really, really reflect the true quality of what love actually is. And also, if we consider from the Catholicism, from the Catholic religion, the symbol that some may be familiar with of the heart bound with a crown of thorns and the eternal flame of the will of God affixed atop the heart itself, merged with and melded to that living organ by the fire of sacrifice. And so that image has for us much significance if we choose to contemplate it. And it ties in the aspect of with the fire atop the heart, and also affixed with the crown of thorns, obviously relating to Christ and the sacrifice that Christ made, and also the fire in a way symbolizing the magnetic exchange that takes place, and also symbolizing the will or father aspect. But again, symbolizing a gateway to a larger, higher awareness, a larger expansion of consciousness, and a more inclusive approach. And also, to elaborate, the sun itself has ever been, from all of the ancient societies, it's ever been the symbol of the one true living God. Many have been accused of being sun worshippers, but in actuality, the sun has ever been the symbol of the one living and true God. Also, in the ancient Indian society, there was a practice called Surya Vidya, which also is known as sun knowledge. And that ties in also to the aspect of the sun as an analogy to the heart. The doctrine or the study of the heart was facilitated and accomplished through this so-called Surya Vidya, or again, sun knowledge, or again, an analogy of the radiatory capacity from, again, if we think of the heart and its radiatory capacity to push blood through the system and to find its way through the various organs, and also the radiatory capacity that the heart has in the sense of the exchange from one person to another, one country to another, and on up into much higher levels as far as systemic and cosmic exchange that takes place. And so, again, the sun has been a symbol for quite a long time, again, and it's a good analogy for how the heart works. Now, again, this exchange of energies, or magnetism, can be experienced at many different levels, and it can be experienced initially at a personal level, if we have a sense of affinity for our fellow man at some level, people that we encounter. We sometimes notice a sense of immediate like or dislike. We may be indifferent in some instances as well, but that magnetic exchange, that interplay, is also based on the quality of the heart that we have latent inside of us that we can take use of. And so, that being the case, that sense, if you will, that we may have of a like for someone or an instant dislike for someone is all tied into that radiation and that magnetic response. It's kind of like sonar in a way, how we can bounce a sonar wave off to an object, and we can tell, we can make some measurements as a result of sounding out and gauging, depth, distance, and those sort of things. It's kind of a similar situation where we throw out a vibe, if you will, maybe consciously or maybe unconsciously, and it's reflected back. We're either going to be warmly received or possibly negatively received, depending. And we can see the results of those exchanges. And again, that's more of a personal level. But these exchanges take place, again, from a personal level between two individuals, all the way on up between nations, planets, solar systems, and then even to larger aspects than that. And so there is a relation at all levels. Now, as far as the quality of desire and the quality of wanting, that is tied into our lower nature, and that is tied into what is known as the solar plexus center, or the center below the diaphragm. And that also is tied into animal instinct. And so the love that we feel, it's attributed to love of things and love of other people, oftentimes has its origin in this desire nature, and it's really, in actuality, not love at all. It's merely desire that we have for a thing, for an object, for an event, for an individual, for a pet possibly. And this is born of want, and this is a self-serving kind of desire. And so again, it's not actually from the heart, and it's not actually love-based. It's more, again, a selfish tendency, and so more so of the lower nature or from the desire aspect. And that's why it is limited in its scope and expression, because it is based on a want for one's own self. It's not based on an inclusive expression. And so that's, again, is part of the limitation of that kind of an exchange. Personality desire is tied into happiness, and many people seek and strive after happiness. Again, happiness is a lower aspect to some other sensations or some other qualities or conditions, and those would be joy and bliss. Now, certainly we can, at some point, some individuals can find through love of an individual, perhaps love of a wife or a significant other, or even love of a pet, this can lead one to find a higher, more inclusive approach, a more all-inclusive love angle, as opposed to just being strictly centered in the desire aspect. But one has to transmute this happiness, which is, again, temporary, of the personality, and not a lasting, significant, real emotion, or that's not proper either, really, so much. But it's not based on the soul and things divine. It's based on the personality, and so it's based on the lower nature. And again, happiness is just a temporary satiation. It's a temporary, it's an appeasing, if you will. It just ties us over with our little wants, desires, and yearnings. That if we get things that we feel are making us happy, it'll, again, like a child with a toy, basically, it'll keep them occupied for a little while until they see there's another toy available, and then they'll want to go over and play with that toy, and they'll forget about the old toy, and that won't have any significance for them anymore. When we attach ourselves and our feelings to objects, then we do find this whole attachment, detachment, and we oftentimes suffer from as a result of attaching our feelings so intimately to an object, even if it is a spouse or a significant other. We can get into a trap by spending all of our time trying to please that other person and make everything right for them, and sacrificing our own lives for the sake of someone else, and forgetting our own responsibilities, and that could happen as well. So this kind of selfish love, again, it could lead someone to a larger, more inclusive style of love that's of the soul, of the spirit, but that's not necessarily the case. So keeping in mind that happiness is based in our desired nature, or our astral nature, and is tied to the etheric or energy body, or the lowest aspect of a man, not considering the dense physical vehicle, because it is not really a quality, it's just an after effect. It's like a caboose at the end of the train. It doesn't really have any motion or volition of its own. It's just being pulled along, and so to consider it a factor is kind of a fallacy. Again, happiness being tied to our desire nature, the higher transmutation of happiness is joy. And to find joy in one's life is a challenge indeed, and it has a very different feel to it, a whole other quality outside of personality, love, and happiness. If one can experience joy in one's life, they can see it far exceeds any level. Even the highest levels of happiness are far exceeded by even just a little glimmering of joy. Joy, again, is of the soul, and so it is a higher aspect, and it is based on the radiatory nature, again, of the heart. And so joy basically springs from a vertical impression, or an impression from God, or from a divine impression that's spread out horizontally. And that's where we get the symbol of the cross, taking a vertical impression and spreading it out horizontally in some form of active expression, some creative expression, or some form of service to one's fellow man. And certainly love factors in very much, and the heart factors in very much to that whole concept as far as the radiatory or magnetic capacity. And that, again, is something that's very important to consider in light of this analogy between these different conditions. Again, the soul is attached to the condition of joy, and there's an even greater condition, which is bliss, and that's attached to the spirit. And that is what the Buddhists describe when they talk of finding nirvana, of finding an ultimate reward, not having to be tied to the cycle of death and rebirth, or reincarnation and karma, but having a fixed state of afterlife, a blissful condition that is more attached to spirit as opposed to soul, or again, this astral or desire nature that is part of us as well. But we find through this revelation these increasing, more inclusive states of mind. We bring into ourselves happiness, which again we find is fleeting and limited. We can grasp it temporarily, but it always eludes us. Joy is something that is more permanent, and once we have a sense of joy instilled in us at some level, and that is also tied into having an acknowledgement at some level of soul. When we can find that as a truth in our own lives, and we can validate that in our own hearts and minds, then that is again a further stepping stone for an even more inclusive and a more all-aware, a more all-inclusive and a more aware level of consciousness, and a greater approach. And again, transmuting even further so into the state of bliss, which is tied to spirit or the Father in heaven aspect. Now, it is helpful to imagine a non-separative approach in this instance, to consider the connectivity. And through the heart is where we do find that sense of connectivity, whether it's through another person, whether it's for a mother, a sister, friends, loved ones, a spouse. Again, all of these ways that we find this exchange taking place, this radiatory or magnetic exchange that takes place. And it's something that we can be very conscious of and feel as well. There's a certain sense or feeling that accommodates and accompanies these levels of understanding and awareness also. Again, that being the case, joy is something that once someone is able to experience at a certain level, it's very much part of them, and they really can't go back, if you will, from having some measure of that understanding. That they'll always be able to recapture that glimmer of a soul enlightenment, if you will, a soul acknowledgement, and to bring that back. And that's part and parcel of the whole path of return to divinity, is trying to make that condition a more permanent condition in one's existence, in one's heart and one's mind, and to have at all times the non-separative and all-inclusive mentality that allows one's heart to be fully radiatory at all times. It's when we withdraw that radiatory capacity, or when we withdraw or withhold love, that we are hurting not only ourselves, but we're hurting those around us. As we can become more fuller expressors of this exchange of light and energy and magnetism and love, we'll see demonstrated significant changes as a result. And so, again, it is helpful for those that wish to try to make some sort of return, again, a return to divinity at some level, for them to, again, imagine a non-separative approach and to imagine their small individual role within the larger context, within their community, within the nation, within their state, their nation, on a world level, and even on outside of that. And so becoming more inclusive in our perspective, in our scope, is all part and parcel of this whole uncovering and this whole idea of revelation and this increasing capacity to take this radiatory response and spread it out further. And so much ground can be covered through this radiation. And also another thing that, as a result, that's of a great sense of love, another thing may take place as well, and that is sacrifice. One may sacrifice one's very life, one may sacrifice one's time and effort to either a cause, and this may be a lifelong cause, or this may be a sudden and spontaneous. Perhaps someone sees a little girl running out in front of traffic, and they run out and they grab the little girl and push her out of the way, and they themselves are a victim of being hit by a driver. That would be, again, an instant, spontaneous sacrifice based on love. And we see occasions of that. And also the aspect of eliminating fear. Once we build in this radiatory capacity and this outflowing, this joy becomes more instilled in us and more of a permanent part of us, then gradually fear is eliminated, and there is no sense of fear, and there is no sense of separateness. And even in our most lonely and isolated instances, we still have a deep and profound sense of being interconnected to all living things. And so that is very important for us to consider as well. The elimination of fear and worry, and the transmutation from speculation and conjecture and instinctual leanings into an intuitional or divine-based understanding, and to be able to know truth, to be able to sense, again, through this capacity based upon the heart, to be able to know rather than to guess and be subject to uncertainty. One can be firm in one's understanding, stand firm in one's own truth, and again, eliminate all fear and worry. And that is part and parcel of what esoteric science can allow one to bring into one's own life and demonstrate, if one so chooses. The heart is a very sensitive organ, and so it definitely carries the impressions it receives, and a lot of times the way that an emotion hits us and hits our hearts will often tend to ripple out, and this whole magnetic play goes out like someone throwing a rock into a stream, and you see into a pond rather, and you see the ripples spreading out. Or also in the event of sound waves being sent out and resounding. And we see, again, this radiatory or magnetic capacity, how it flows out from a person and it makes its way and exchanges with other individuals. And so we can relate to love from the idea of suffering as well. And this is something that Buddha taught very much about, trying to avoid suffering by trying to detach oneself from all things of form, all material things. And so through suffering we find several conditions. We find empathy, we find sympathy, and ultimately we can find ecstasy. Now, as far as the word empathy, being empathetic to another person means you can feel for their situation. If you encounter someone that falls on some hardship, you can relate to them and you can feel for them in that sense, and so you're empathetic or sympathetic in that same sense too. Those two words are very closely tied to one another. So that being the case, sympathy too. We can have a sympathy for someone. If we see someone is falling on hard times, or we see someone has some misadventure and they're suffering, we tend to commiserate, or we tend to feel that. We can somehow relate to that suffering at some level. And that ties into the whole aspect of the heart and the radiatory capacity. And so as we relate to others, when we hear of the gripping dramas that are played out and portrayed in the media that move us to and fro like marionettes, Or we hear offered up accounts from family and friends, heart-wrenching tales, or accounts of achievement and triumph. And often we hear of lament and remorse over lost opportunities, of a better bygone era. All of these things tend to affect us, and our heart tends to go out to these people. You know, when we see the news of a plane crash or something like that, you know, again, we tend to feel for those people. And that whole radiatory response is part and parcel of the science. It may be cold to some people to consider love within this aspect of radiation and science and magnetic response. But ultimately, there is a science involved with it, and each person is an emitter of light and is an expresser of this radiatory capacity of love. Now, certain individuals are better prepared and better channels, if you will, than others as far as being an expresser or an emitter of this light, if you will, spiritual light. And so that being the case, as we fit ourselves to be more suitable servants of the race, a byproduct of that life of service is, again, this radiatory capacity. Because if we selflessly seek in our lives to serve, then this radiatory capacity is going to bloom out and blossom out more so and flower out and find some expression. And so as this magnetic response intermingles and exchanges with the other magnetic response of other like-minded individuals, we have ultimately here and there little pockets of people with a greater capacity for a magnetic response. And so their field of influence is larger. And so they're throwing out a vibe, if you will, that extends to a greater length than maybe a person that's not so spiritually predisposed. And so this is part and parcel of, again, different individuals, and to consider the entire globe in light of that fact. That in all over the planet, in different varying pockets and different varying camps, you're going to find different individuals that are able to, at some level, emit love and emit this radiatory capacity that is a magnetic and inclusive energy. And so, and that is the case with love. It is a magnetic, it is a drawing to sort of energy. It's not a repelling or pushing away. It's very much an inclusive and a bringing in type of energy. And that's why the universe itself is based on love at the highest levels. And so when we consider all of the individuals, there being 6 billion people on this planet, that there are many individuals that have mastered at some level this radiatory response, and they're able to, from their own being, from their own essence, to push out, again, this magnetism and to affect other people, and in a positive way in this instance. And so you get ultimately a blanket effect where you have many, many hundreds of millions, really, you could probably say there are over 1 billion in actuality, that have at least some level of soul awareness, that have at some level discovered Christ in the cave of the heart. And that also ties in at another level to the idea of heart and this more inclusive approach that many are becoming aware of. And so we see that separatist thinking and ideology is being pushed by the wayside, more so in favor of group response, group thinking, and more collective and cohesive ways of expression on the planet at all levels. And so this also is part of this radiatory response, that these like-minded individuals are able to throw out this vibe, if you will, and to circumvent the entire globe, and again find like-minded individuals that can be part of an organization, a group, an effort, an ideal. All of this ties into this capacity, again, a blanketing, if you will, of many, many individuals worldwide. And this is very much our hope and our glory, that there are enough of these individuals thinking like-mindedly enough that are going to bring this positive energy and allow it to have points of connectivity. And so from one person to the next, the magnetic exchange is carried forward. And so we have, again, a blanket from different points of light, and it works its way kind of like a spider web, if you will, ultimately, and where all of these points of light all over the globe are connected by this radiatory capacity, and so they link up with one another. And so we find different levels by virtue of this exchange of cooperation. And also, if we consider the heart as a center and its relation to humanity, the center of the heart would be tied to Christ and the church invisible, just in the same sense that the head or will aspect is tied to the Father in heaven aspect. So mind, will, or the Father in heaven are tied to the heart aspect or the love aspect, which is the way in which Christ and the church invisible work. And so this ties humanity to the heart, if you will, to that heart center, and then ultimately to the head. And so that being the case, our humanity is tied into a larger heart center. And that, again, is part of this radiatory capacity that takes place outside of our planetary understanding. And that the radiatory capacity, starting with each individual person, ultimately builds its way up into it's connected with a larger magnetic exchange, a larger web, if you will, that ties in the entire cosmos, and that we are all interconnected. Now, if we understand the concept of, from the Hindu religion of Agni, or the god of fire, this whole fiery quality is part and parcel of this magnetic response. We can think of this fire exchanging throughout the whole entire, all of existence. And this fire gives us our vitality, and it's also the same as what would be termed prana, or life force. And so this ties in as well with the saying in the Bible, our God is a consuming fire. Now also we hear that God is love. And so if we understand, again, this tie-in between fire and the quality of love, and that bringing again the analogy of the heart in the physical body that pushes the blood through the circulatory system and that nourishes the organs in the body, just in the same sense that the energy that the sun exchanges goes through the different planets in a solar system. That analogy between those two bodies, there's much that can be gleaned from that comparison. And so then we can understand why the practice of Surya Vidya, or sun knowledge, was also considered the doctrine of the heart to the ancients in India. Excuse me. And so again, the concept of God as a consuming fire and the concept of God as love, tying the sun, our sun of our solar system, to the heart, and the job that each does at its individual level, and the tie between the two. And also, when we understand of the path of return to divinity called yoga, or union, that all true yoga starts and ends with the heart. From our earliest aspirations, one first tries to understand the aspect of Christ in the cave of the heart, and have a firm understanding that we have a soul beyond any question in one's mind, that one is firmly convinced that one has a soul. Then one has gone through that level of understanding and awareness. That again, the heart enables us from those early initial aspirations to finally build and build and build and continue to build into a very inclusive, or an all-inclusive approach and understanding. And so that being the case, again, from our earliest aspirations on up to our greatest inclusive visions, it all is based on the heart, and it all starts and ends with the heart. And as one aspect that would be noticed if one were to consider doing this type of exercise, the centers related to the heart. If one tries to approach yoga in the sense of from a serving attitude, from an all-inclusive angle, then one will begin to understand, or will begin to sense in their lives activity and circumstances changing as a result of this trying to bring in a more all-inclusive approach. And we're going to find this radiatory response that we're sending out is going to be like a beacon, if you will, and we're going to be able to draw back into us, kind of like a moths to a flame, if you will. That whole analogy ties in as well, that light that we emit will be noticed by other individuals like-minded, and that will be able to gravitate towards the expression of light and love that one is sending out. And so that being the case, this whole the whole science of the centers is involved as well, that certain centers revolved are related to our thinking are going to open at certain times. And so if we concentrate on the heart and a more inclusive approach and a magnetic response and an attitude of serving and an attitude of love and inclusiveness towards one's fellow man and all of the other living things, then one will find the appropriate centers coincident with this process opening, active, and coming into, again, some level of expression. And one in particular would be the heart center, the etheric heart center, that one would notice about 6 inches from the back between the shoulder blades. And that would be one indicator of some progress in along those lines. And again, this would lead ultimately to an all-inclusive and synthetic understanding and awareness. And it is, again, very important to consider the flowering forth and the radiatory and magnetic warmth of love, and how it begins in many instances with a single individual, and how that spreads itself out in the larger picture. And let's see. Also, the whole idea of if we could view all of the individuals that have some level of love and some intent to serve humanity, that we will find, again, if we could view the situation, we could see that there are enough points of light collectively among all the different individuals on the planet that are thinking like-mindedly in this way, that would blanket or coat or cover our entire planet in a blanket of light, if you will, because the numbers are that great. And the intent, again, that's very important as well. Our massed intent is very strong in this sense as well. And so keeping in mind the idea of the heart as this way to reach others, this radiatory vehicle, that it has to be ruled by the head. And that's something very important to realize as well, that love has to be ruled by wisdom. And without direction, would just end up as just emotion, just spent energy with no real direction. And so all aspiration, all love, and all of this inclusive approach has to be tied in with an intelligent understanding and with wise governing and directing intent. So again, tying in intent to the quality of love is very important, because we have to have the proper intent in order to express and move love in a scientific manner. Now, many times people find heartache through disruption of one form or another, and they may find that through the ending of a relationship, or maybe they've lost their job or something like that, or maybe a loss of a loved one. Many instances where people find a sense of disruption take place, and they're very much heartbroken as a result of this, because there is some change or some test or some trial that comes along that leads to upheavals and leads to some kind of a violent spasm, and leads to much heartache. But that is part and parcel of the learning of life's lessons, and that this disruption is all part of breaking away and overcoming old, stagnant, and crystallized means of thinking and feeling that are no longer valid for us. And so we have to have this sense of disruption or an upheaval in order for us to get past limiting situations and qualities, to have a more inclusive approach and a fresh perspective on things, and being put through a test or a trial by fire, if you will. And that we will hopefully come out stronger and better as a result of any sort of testing, trial, or upheaval that again leads to us feeling heartsick or defeated and broken down. But if we look at it in the proper perspective, we can learn from this disruptive situation, and we can find our way out of this, and again become stronger as a result. A strong heart is not still. It's always active, radiatory, magnetic, moving, and that also ties in with the aspect of healing as well, the healing capacity that we have as far as this radiatory, magnetic response, that we send this out to others, and it does have a healing effect as well as just being a cohesive, soothing, and a magnetic and a drawing together an inclusive sense. Now again, the heart is a generator of much intensity, and if we could truly understand how much heat, if you will, how much energy can be generated through the heart, that is all part and parcel of one's capacity to have a radiatory response. The more one is able to generate this heat, if you will, through the capacity of the heart, the wider and greater one's influence will be through this magnetic response. So would like to go ahead and grab a call and see what's going on this evening. Hello, caller.
Yes, I
Hi.
was just thinking that a lot of what you're saying sounds very yin and yang to me, kind of like the energy that is played off of masculine, feminine, positive, and negative throughout the universe, all the way from the molecular level to solar systems to galaxies, like the sun being the nucleus of an atom, for instance,
Right,
being
right.
positive and stationary, and electrons, the planets. And you have the give and take between man and woman, male, female, whatever.
Right.
It seems to be a pervading thing in the universe. It's kind of like a glue, almost.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
I would say that definitely ties into my discussion on the heart and that whole exchange that you're talking about, male and female, the melding between the heart and the head. A lot of times the heart is attributed to the female aspect and the head is attributed to a male aspect, and the
Well, yeah, and then it's both of us, but you more so than I. I'm speaking more in symbolism, but to me, to be detached is not to use as much symbolism, such as, heart and this, that, and another, but it's, you were saying, intuitive. It's kind of like if you grasp it, you lose it. So again, it's like intent. You have to not want something to get something, so to speak. Of course, that's more Zen or...
Well, I think I see where you're coming from as far as that. I would just say that, if you're wanting something for your own personal self, for selfish reasons, you may very well get it, but to have a motive of all-inclusiveness and to try to have some gain in one's life in order to share and have some level of exchange, as far as going from the idea of happiness to joy, one may find happiness if one attaches oneself to objects, cars, boats, planes, whatever.
Follow your joy.
I'm sorry?
Follow your joy.
Right, but then when you have some measure of understanding of joy...
In a sense of timelessness.
Joy in the sense of timelessness?
Yes, joy.
Right, exactly. Right, and then outside of that and beyond that, bliss. If we can achieve a sense of bliss, which very few people have a reference for true bliss. They confuse that oftentimes with happiness, again, which is just attaching oneself to objects, ultimately. Even if it is your wife or a loved one or a pet, ultimately that is of desire as opposed to a love aspect, a joy aspect. But it can, I think, lead in some instances to a more inclusive approach and understanding. Love of an individual can ultimately, in some instances, lead to a greater, more inclusive love. I'm sorry? I'm sorry, caller. You got to go ahead. Finish.
Do we just mirror what's already there in a sense, as far as that goes? Because time is, if you define it in that way, and I do, is a continuum, and there's a returning, and what was learned is new again, and in a sense that we see things very linearly,
right.
as going from point A to point B, and time in between. But the macrocosm, time is it's hard to put into words. But the closest thing I can say is returning in time is the fates, so to speak. Because if you went back in time, your die has been cast. I don't know if I'm making any sense.
Well,
but
I think maybe
see things and all. That's more existential, I would think, in a way. But if you resign to fate, then you don't have attachment, or you're detached.
Well, I would say, to complement what you're saying, that our limited finite mind can only perceive so much, and certainly at higher levels, time is non-existent. Time is only something that we understand in our physical, mundane plane. But I would say that this whole mutation process of going down into the physical and then returning back, that whole process has to go through the human testing and trial and this whole kitchen in order for it to be refined. Love, it goes through the process here, the melding and the test and the trial by fire, and then it is tempered and tested, and then that, whatever, good comes out of that is what returns, and the lesser is left behind and overcome. But that love aspect would be transmuted and made into a higher love, if you will.
Yeah, I guess I'm getting more into like quantum.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and grab another couple of calls, but I do thank you for taking the time to call in this evening. Take care. Hello, caller. Hello? Yes, you're there. Hello?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Great. How are you?
Good, good. Is there something you care to ask this evening?
What's the longest relationship you've ever had?
Me, personally, I was with a young lady for about 8 years, a number of years ago.
Wow, that's a lot.
That's a very long time, and
You fucking lot.
Thank you for your question. See, what you're confusing, obviously, is lust, desire, the lower nature. That really has no place in this more inclusive angle that I'm talking about, as far as having an impersonal love and not having a love for a person, a thing, an animal, what have you. So it might be helpful for you to consider that a bit as well, caller. Hello, caller. You're on the air. Hello?
Hello?
Yeah, you're there. Go ahead.
Hey, how are you doing? I was just wanted to hear your thoughts on if you thought this type of information, this knowledge will be like stressed or acknowledged in our society that we live in today to its fullest potential in a positive way. And I think you're doing a great thing for Austin. I hope all the viewers are you're able to maybe expand your viewers and so I'll just hang to listen.
Hey, thanks. I appreciate that. Yeah, I really do. That's part of my hope, and that's part of why I chose to get this. A lot of circumstances came together to be helpful of the whole timing of me getting the show when I did. But definitely myself and my producer, we feel that this is a good avenue, a good soapbox to get some of these ideas out, and that they do have a timing, relevance right now in this day and age with so much craziness going on and so many people trying to find some measure of understanding in their lives and try to make sense of it all. You've got different people coming from different areas, both here on Access and through the mainstream media, that it's difficult to have a sense of discernment, to wade their way through intelligently and to trust your heart, trust your intuition, and make your way through this maze. And so that's why I think it is important to try to bring these ABCs, if you will, out of esoteric science, and that they do have validity now, that people can make use of it at some level. That's my hope, that I can at least, even if one word somehow has a way of triggering something in somebody's response that is allowing them to have some fuller understanding or to branch out and be more inclusive in some respect. That's definitely my hope. And if it's just a handful of people, that's great. I think I've done what I've set out to do. If it's more than that, that's all the better as well. But definitely, I think at many levels, this information is definitely destined to come out in a more inclusive way that's going to find its way into financial discussions, social programs, education, governmental at all levels, music, science, art. All areas of human endeavor have been based in the esoteric science in the past, and they will again flower forth in the full effulgence of that potential, I think, very much so in the future. So thank you for asking that question and for your kind words. I do very much appreciate that. I think there is a lot of hope for esoteric science in the future, in that we can cover a lot of ground and hopefully at least get people to think about things. I'm just throwing this out there more so for people just to be able to think about it a little bit and make up their own minds. So again, considering the heart as a magnetic response, and that the heart center itself allows us to have an exchange with other individuals and entities of the lower kingdoms, the animal, plant, mineral, and below, and then on up to even more inclusive levels of consciousness and understanding, and that we can understand our part in this whole big work, and we can wade our way through, again, with some level of discernment, some level of understanding, and then we can let our hearts and our intuition guide us and help us to find our way, again, to find the proper way for us individually, to find the proper work that we need to be involved in, and to also find those individuals that we can cooperate with that will allow us to more so facilitate the work, that we can do greater work by having greater numbers. And if we do have an earnest approach towards making a return to divinity, that we will find, I promise you will find success in discovering those people that can help you and finding the means to get your goals accomplished. Especially, again, if they're inclusive and you have love as a motive, as your sole motive and goal, then you will find the means, and you will be very amazed at first, possibly, and surprised at how you're able to get from point A to point B and how things are working out in your favor for you to be able to accomplish what you're setting out to accomplish. And then after a while, you'll see that that's just how it is, and you'll not really be so awed and overwhelmed by it, and you'll just think of it as part of the whole process, and you'll accept it, acknowledge it, and then you'll be able to move on from there. I would like to encourage everybody to come on down to Opal Divines tomorrow. It's our philosophical meeting. Jeff Contreras and myself are hosting. It's at 700 West 6th Street. Again, that's tomorrow night, which would be August 21st for this particular month. It's the third Wednesday of every month. It will be starting around 8 o'clock and ending whenever. And we're going to be talking about a variety of different things, whatever is on your mind, really, along the lines of metaphysical and philosophical discussions. Please consider watching the other awareness shows that my producer's putting up on the screen. I would like to thank my producer, Chris, for commanding the helm of the Starship Esoterica. I would like to encourage everyone to stay tuned for Chris Athanas and the Reality Expander television show coming up next. This particular next Tuesday, which is the 27th, I will not be here. There's going to be a class that's going to be carried on in this studio, so I'm not going to have a live show on the 27th, but I will be back the following Tuesday. So there will be a tape show that will be put on air for that day. But again, I would like to remind everybody, if you have an opportunity, please come down to Opal Divines, to our philosophical meetings, metaphysical and philosophical meetings that Jeff Contreras from Therefore I Am and myself host, again, starting around 8 o'clock and ending whenever, either if the Real Deal film guys show up to show a movie, or later on if we have more access to the place. Again, this has been a discussion on the heart, and I would like to, if people would please consider how they can have a radiatory response in their own lives, and how they're either sending out a positive radiatory response or they're withdrawing and withholding the radiatory response of love. If you can consider in your own lives your capacity to do this, if you so choose. I'd also like to remind folks that we are here live, in most instances, unless there's a class or otherwise, every Tuesday on Channel 10 at 8 o'clock. Thanks again, Austin. Have a nice evening.